for every community, and it was formed through participation by every community that we work with. So we all know we're growing rapidly. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes going through this and then answer any questions that you've got about this. But by all means, interrupt me as I go through this. We all know that we're growing rapidly. I think from my perspective, the feel of growth has really changed. We're starting to, for example, spill out and see lots of growth in new valleys. We're starting to see a lot more infill and redevelopment. There's a lot of different ways that growth, infrastructure, open space preservation can unfold. And the notion of Wasatch Choice 2050 is let's think about coordinating the activities of local government, regional infrastructure providers, even the state government. How do we align those things so that we maximize quality of life? That's the concept. And so it was an effort that involved our organization all the way down through Utah County, the Salt Lake Chamber, Envision Utah, the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, League of Cities and Towns, and all of those communities that we serve. So very broad-based, a grassroots effort that was, and I'm giving you the very high-level story here, but let's start with what do we want to achieve. If we got in a time machine and we landed in the future in 2050, what's the quality of life that we would hope we would have? And now let's see how we get there. Let's set those goals, then let's look at different ways to achieve those goals, and then let's drill down into the details enough that it's clear what we all ought to do as we work within our own spheres to get to that future. That's the idea. And so here are the 5 things I'm going to touch base on in the next handful of minutes. What are the goals that we all landed on? What are the key strategies, the key things that resonated across the region as these are the, forgive me, it's 4 or 5, I do this. It's 4 or 5 key strategies. What is the geography of those strategies? How does this land on a map? And why should we care? What are some of the regional outcomes? And then I've just got a few parting thoughts for Salt Lake City itself. Our council, which is made up of elected officials from across the region, it has been, the Mayor Biskupski has been a member of our council. So it represents that whole area, listened to feedback from across the region, came to these goals. Here's the idea with these is, this might be pretty common for you all here at the city to think holistically, to think about how affordable is life, what is our environmental impact, in addition to how well does our economy thrive. But think about UDOT, okay? Or think about EDCU, the Economic Development Corporation of Utah. Do they think about housing affordability? Do they think about environmental sustainability? Can we get a broad group of people to align across a holistic set? I'm not going to go through these one by one, but this is the idea, is let's all think about how investments, land development decisions, et cetera, impact lots of things, not just a narrow set of outcomes. So those are the goals. Those were adopted by Wasatch Front Regional Council. These are the 4 key strategies, and I'll go through these one by one, but we heard these resonate across the region. These will sound a little bit like motherhood and apple pie to you, so I'll go through them quickly. Let's provide transportation choices. People have the options to get around the way they want to. We embed that into the Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. Have you heard about this document? So that strategy is really moved forward in Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. So Wasatch Choice 2050, this conversation has a formal basis in the transportation plan that UDOT and UTA must follow. So it's not just, pardon my use of the term adorable, it's not just an adorable vision. It's a vision that affects the transportation plan formally. And it contemplates having people move from, let's say, 20% have access to high-capacity transit. Can we approximately double that? Can we approximately double those that have access to safe bicycling facilities? The second is housing options, a range of housing options to meet the diversity of wants and needs. The third is to preserve open space, and the fourth is perhaps the crux of Wasatch Choice 2050, which is let's link these things together. Let's link our economic development decisions with transportation and housing decisions. Let me give you a quick sense of one of the sicknesses in transportation planning nationwide. Hey, we built something. Now development will happen. Look at how we spurred the economy. It doesn't matter where that construction happened or where the development happened. It could be far-flung so that people have to commute a long distance. Nobody cares. Let's think strategically about where we are helping economic development happen. Can people get there? How does it relate to housing affordability? Can we maximize our infrastructure investment? So we've simplified that fourth strategy, link economic development with transportation and housing decisions, which does not fit on a bumper sticker, into hashtag where matters. So we even have the hashtag and everything. But this is one of, if you have 2 or 3 key takeaways from my presentation, I hope this is one of them, which is that when we all maximize the opportunities of regional infrastructure, we do a lot better as a region. Where are those places? Well, those are TRAX line along 400 South. They're the front runner stops. They're even freeway interchanges. They are those places. Are we maximizing them? This is Layton. Can Layton take a front runner station and turn it into a walkable place? Now, the concept here is centered development. Here's a city without centers, and the same city, same number of homes and jobs with centers. And the cursor, you can see my cursor. We are seeing, and I bet you're seeing this in Salt Lake City too, we are seeing communities around the region say, we are tired of dealing with aggressive developers and the demands of growth, and we don't want it. And we certainly don't want to have more dense development than we're used to. Let's just say no. Let's just say no everywhere. Well, what happens when we say no everywhere? The development does go somewhere. It relocates, but just to a less desirable location. It doesn't disappear. There's no magic wand that causes it to poof, go away. It just spreads out. What we found is, by listening to the communities that we've participated with through this process, is if we say yes in strategic places and we allow development to occur, maybe in a very dense format, but in a way that creates a sense of place and supports transit use. This is TOD, it's new downtowns, it's revitalizing existing downtowns. That's the nexus between what's politically palatable and also what is great for the region. That's the concept of centers. And so the image on the right takes advantage of the strategic locations, creates a strong sense of place in those locations, and the net effect is, if you can see the edge, it actually saves a lot of land. It results in a general set of positive outcomes, reducing growth pressure on the edge, better affordability for jobs, for homes and commuting, and resulting cleaner air. In other words, where matters, but we have to think about these things as a region. We can't just think about this development on this block, is it good or bad? We have to back up and think, what's the regional pattern here? Those are the strategies. Downtown is part of that strategy, right? You recognize these images, 15th and 15th, 9th and 9th, Sugar House, 4th South. Salt Lake City is a city of vibrant centers. This is the story of the way development is unfolding in Salt Lake City. I'm here to reinforce that this is not just a Salt Lake City issue, it's a regional issue, how these centers go. But they're happening in other areas. There are other other areas outside of Salt Lake City that are experiencing all kinds of interesting issues too. This is the Cairns in downtown Sandy. All right, so I went through the goals, I did the strategies and outcomes, and then here's the geography of Wasatch Choice 2050, which I will not go through in any detail, but I will invite you to peruse it later on your own. But there is a map and an entire website that breaks the elements, transportation, land use, economic development, and open space into components, and invites communities to drill down, think about what are we doing, where are we going. Wasatch Choice comes from cities. We're trying to help cities go where you want to go while you think about the region. So the map gets at roads, transit, bicycling, investments, and major land use components, centers, but also employment areas, industrial areas, and open space. And so this is looking at the Wasatch Choice website, zooming into Salt Lake City, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail. I'm just giving you the lay of the land. And how am I doing on time, Madam Chair? Okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
So it combines those components together in a vision map, then it breaks it up into specific details. If you were to go to this and click on any particular line, you would get details about what is contemplated in the transportation plan. So for example, you'd learn about the timing and details of a proposed bus rapid transit line on 2nd South, and the timing and details of a proposed S-line connection, the Sugar House line connection to 4th South. So this is the most formal component of the vision because this is the formal transportation plan. The land use component came directly from feedback from staff, commission was invited, city council, mayor, through a 4-year process. So these represent the centers that you said we are working on. They may already be in your general plan. You might be contemplating working on some of these centers over time. So this is a hierarchy of centers. You can certainly see downtown and State Street and smaller centers as well. Certainly, for example, that is Sugar House, right? And then there is economic development. One of the things that you'll find here is these are the state's, what do they call them? I'm trying to find their term, but it's the state's core economic clusters. These are the economic clusters that the state says Utah has a competitive advantage on these types of clusters: bioscience, IT, in some places aerospace, things like that, where Utah has a competitive advantage. Where are they happening? Where are they clustering? You'll get that information on this. And then the last one is recreation and open space, which I will frankly tell you is the Achilles heel of Wasatch Choice 2050. We need to work on that as a region, but we recognize that we need to work on that. So that's the geography. This has a lot of benefits for the region. A few of them are, if you think about how many jobs a household can get to on average, does this make sense? Within a typical commute, how much interaction can you get to? By the way, this is a strong predictor of upward economic mobility for lower income households. The more jobs and educational opportunities they can get to, the much more likely it is they can move up the socioeconomic ladder. More important by transit. But here's today. If we don't institute the vision, we anticipate that declines to 130,000 for car, 38,000 for transit. Does that make sense? And if we institute that vision, coordinating centers in transit, centers infrastructure, economic development, then we can do a lot better than we're at today. So congestion grows, it will. We can still actually have better ability to interact with our economy and help especially lower income residents forge a better life for themselves. That's one of the outcomes. Cleaner air, which I won't go through in a lot of detail, but the projection is if we work on these things together, we'll have 60% better air than today. And we'll save money on infrastructure by using the infrastructure that we have in place today to the tune of approximately $6 billion regionally. Those are some of the benefits that we're projecting. Last point, and then I will stop and see if you have any questions you want to discuss. I'm going to say something that you may already completely agree with, but I want to even say it's a fact. It's a fact that Salt Lake City is the best place for growth in Utah. Discuss. Here are some data points behind that. This is greenhouse gas emissions per household. If I were to zoom out, you would see Salt Lake City as this light-colored area, in other words, low emissions per household, and you'd see the rest of Utah is basically really bright red. This is one of the few places where we have relatively low greenhouse gas emissions per household. That tracks with tons of other impacts: energy use, water use, and on. Air emissions, pardon me. Part of that is because there's a better ability to walk in Salt Lake City. Density, mix, street connectivity. In Salt Lake City, a household that locates in Salt Lake City is able to get to more jobs, have more opportunities, has a better opportunity to build a great life by being able to interact with more of the economy. That's another reason. That's what this map shows you. If it's darker, it's the more destinations you can get to. Left is by auto and right is by transit. And this data is available to you, and it drills down into a lot of depth. And I invite you to take a look at it. This is a really powerful metric that combines how far you can commute as well as how many origins and destinations are within that commute. It's a combination of transportation and land use. Another data point about why Salt Lake is the best place for growth: housing and transportation combined costs are towards the lower end regionally, and part of that is because transportation costs are low. I know you're working on housing affordability. You should know and remember that transportation costs are naturally lower in Salt Lake City, and that's part of that housing and transportation affordability equation. So, last slide, or second to last slide. Salt Lake is the heart of the region. It's the best place for growth in Utah. Lowest environmental footprint per person, lowest per household cost of transport, best access to jobs and services. I want to let you know or remind you, you may already know this, your leadership as a city is very visible. We love to put you on a pedestal. And you are doing this. This is not new. The things you're doing to address housing affordability, it resonates beyond your city. The way you deal with parking, it's not a minutia question. A lot of other people do, but it resonates. Green Bike, the 9 line, I could go on and on and on, right? The way you're dealing with scooters, as an example. Lots of things. When you innovate, we love it and we use it and it ripples. So just be aware of that. And regardless of what you do on the policy front, as goes Salt Lake, to a large extent, so goes the region. When you think about transit use growing in Salt Lake City, it tends to enable us to have stronger transit across the entire region. Let me have you do a real quick thought exercise. Picture the Bay Area without San Francisco, and instead of San Francisco, plug in, oh goodness. So okay, plug in Salt Lake City. Now ask yourself, do you still get BART? Downtown really drives regional transportation. That's my point. I kind of messed that up by having Salt Lake be plugged in. I messed that up. I should have disparaged Phoenix or something like that. That's my bad. All right. As goes Salt Lake, so goes much of the overall economy. Just ask Detroit. That's another example in that front. But the heart of the region matters a ton. You already know this, and these are part of the reasons why it was my honor to be here and share with you this overall regional framework. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you tell us where we can find this information?
Yes, thank you.
Please?
Thank you very much, Brenda. WFRC.org, and right on the front page is a link that'll take you here.
And it's all an interactive map?
Yes, that's correct, yes. If you click on any item, it gives you more detail.
Will you talk a little bit about the predictive part of the map? That, in 2050, this street is going to have to look like this to meet these demands? Because I think that's an interesting component of it.
The transportation plan is based on extensive modeling using two models, a travel demand model and a real estate model. The travel demand model gives us a sense of how people will behave, how they will want to commute, where they will want to go, what those impacts will have on the road system and the transit system and air quality. And the real estate market model gives us a sense of how will the development sector interact with zoning given that future infrastructure. And so it's not a perfect thing, but it does give us all a general sense of if we do A, B, C, and D, what are those impacts? So it's useful in getting a broad sense of impacts regional. It's also useful in helping us get a sense of how can we take advantage of or mitigate different transportation issues that might pop up across the region. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so I wonder, do you know if cities along the Wasatch Front are utilizing that in their transportation planning?
Those models, most cities don't. Some cities use them when they do their overall transportation master plan, and that's the time that they will utilize those models. So some cities do that, and including Salt Lake City. When Salt Lake City does your large-scale transportation master plans, those are utilized.
Any other questions? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Okay, now moving on to our public hearings. The first item on our agenda is an ADU for 942 South, 900 East, case number PLN PCM 2019-00651.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is in regard to an ADU that's been proposed at 942 South, 900 East. And this is being done, Andrea Palmer of Modal Living is seeking conditional use approval for the detached accessory dwelling unit at the rear of the subject parcel on behalf of the owner of the parcel. And this is happening because it's located in the R1 5000 zoning district. And all ADU proposals located in single-family zoning districts must go through a conditional use approval process. This is a map of the area. Right at the top, the intersection there is 900 South, 900 East, very famous node of Salt Lake City, 9th and 9th. And it is located just a little ways down in the middle of that block right there on 9th East. The red highlight is showing the subject parcel. These are photographs, the front of the house, which is shown here, and then the rear of the house, the backyard where the ADU would be located. And this area here is, this is located on an alleyway, and this is showing an access point where another car can be located there and gain access from the rear. This is another view of it. It's showing the site plan here and then where the ADU would actually be placed on the site. And with this, the parking has 2 spaces that are accessed from 900 East and 1 from the alley. So there would be a total of 3 on that site. As you can see on the site plan, the 2 spaces accessed from 900 East are located behind the front facade of the house. And then coming from the rear yard, another one can be located under an existing carport that is back there. And the entrance to the ADU unit itself is on the east side, so it is facing the rear entrance of the house that's on the site. And then the separation from the other houses, the 2 lots that are abutting it to the north and south, is approximately 53 feet and 70 feet from the principal dwellings on those parcels. And specific design elements of this ADU. The size is 432 square feet, length is 32 feet, width is 13.5 feet, and the height is 11 feet 3 inches. The exterior materials will be tongue and groove red cedar siding, and the foundation will be poured concrete footings with a skirt around the perimeter, a concrete skirt around the perimeter. And based on the information in the staff report, planning staff has determined that the project generally meets the conditional use standards and recommends the Planning Commission approve the petition conditioned upon the applicant complying with the ADU registration process.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff at this point?
So I know that this is in front of us because it is in the R1 zoning. Why was it chosen that R1 zoning should have conditional uses? Can you just remind us of that?
You want to dive in, John?
Sure. No, it was the council's policy at the time. That generally most of our other zones, like RMF and SR1A zones, already have a lot of mixture of different types of housing, where our R1 zones were generally just single family. And so this was adding another element to that. And so to get it expanded away from just those transit-heavy areas, it used to be you had to be within half a mile of a rail line. So to do that, it made the council felt more comfortable saying if we did it the conditional use process, we would know that each site would be looked at uniquely and individually, and if there is some sort of negative impact, that conditions can be added to help mitigate that.
Okay, and the reason I asked the question is because from the staff report, it looks like it perfectly meets the ADU ordinance, at least as interpreted in the staff report. But the ADU ordinance is by right in multifamily zones, but conditioned in single-family zones. So what is it above and beyond the exact text of the ordinance that we're supposed to be reviewing in order to make a decision?
So with any
Or
condition,
is there nothing?
no, there is. But for any conditional use, what we're looking at is, are there negative impacts that need to be conditioned upon to negate those impacts? So the city generally, we have permitted use, conditional use, not. A conditional use is generally assumed to be a permitted use as long as there's no substantial negative impacts that can't be mitigated. And so those things, like for example, some ADUs have been required to have a privacy fence to help contain that unit and provide some privacy to neighbors. Things like lighting, things to avoid sound or other types of nuisances, or those are the kind of things that you'd be looking at to say, what are the negative impacts that come from this use? If there are any, what conditions can we put on to mitigate those?
Thanks. Will we be hearing from the applicant?
Yes.
Yes, the applicant is here.
Yeah. Any other questions for staff? No? Great. If the applicant is here, we would love to hear from him or her. Hi, please make sure to state your name for the record.
My name is Andrea Palmer, and I am representing Kimberly Lofthouse in this project. She's the current homeowner for 942 South, 900 East. I work for a company called Modal Living. We actually started based off Salt Lake City's accessory dwelling unit ordinance. We were really excited to find a way to help increase the housing shortage in Salt Lake City while also helping homeowners increase their overall property value. But we also wanted to make this process as simple as possible for homeowners homeowners. So that is where we stepped in and helping with the permitting process, just so that this homeowner can relax and sit back until their permitting is completed and they can have their unit placed once it's ready. What's really great about our unit is that it's prefabricated, so it's built off-site in a manufacturing company, and then shipped to the property, ready to be installed and ready to move in within a couple days. There's some site preparation for utilities and any other like trees or any removal like that. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. And once the unit is built, it's just craned back into the backyard and ready to go. What's really great about her property, because doing a lot of these projects, I've seen a lot of neighbors being concerned with congestion and parking. But with her having the alleyway access, you're not going to see any congestion with ADU occupant parking on 9th East. So overall, she has a really perfect property for the accessory dwelling unit. As far as use goes, she has a lot of family that lives out of town, and so she's really excited to have a place for them to stay when they come to visit. But what's also really great about the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is that there is the possibility for rental to generate more income. So that is also something that she has an option of using as a rental. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward and simple, and I think her property fits the unit perfectly.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant from the commission? Darren?
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
To what degree is your unit customizable?
We give them the option to choose exterior cladding, exterior color. There's some options inside with flooring, cabinetry colors, but for the most part, it's pretty much all furnished. They really just have to get a mattress for their bed and any other decorations, whatnot, but that's as far as it goes customizable. We have just one floor plan that they're able to use, so.
Thanks.
Could you explain the tongue and groove material that's being used?
That is a good question. Do you have any answers for that? Tongue and groove? Sorry.
Hi, my name is Colin Jube. I'm also with Modal Living. What sort of clarification were you looking for on the exterior
What
finishes?
is it?
It's cedar. So tongue and groove just being the way that it's held together and connected, but it's painted this gray, dark gray color that you see.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
All right, we will now open the public hearing portion of the meeting. Is there anyone here from the Community Council who would like to speak? Okay, please come forward. You will have 5 minutes to address us, and please make sure to state your name for the record.
My name is Daryl High. I'm co-chair of the East Liberty Park Community Council, and this is Dave Richards, who is our land use chair. We've held, as a community council, a number of public meetings concerning ADUs, and we wanted to emphasize this evening that as a community council, we generally are in favor of ADUs. We've held meetings for a number of them located within our boundaries and have not taken a position in opposition. We submitted a specific letter with recommendation on this property, and I think John Anderson has that, and we hope that you've received a copy of that with our recommendation. Our concern with this specific property is impact, and specifically with parking, noise, density, and walkability issues. If you look at the overhead views of the property, it shows, and the owners represented, that there were 2 parking spaces in front of the property on 9th East, which is not allowed according to city code. We met as a board last Saturday and discussed this property. The only place that's possible to park, there is a driveway on the front, but it's so narrow between the house and the fence that they've put garbage cans in that spot. So that, by code, would relegate the owners of the home to park in the rear. The only access for the ADU would need to be from the alleyway, and we're not sure that there's adequate parking for the owner of the house and the ADU. We've received a number of calls from local residents. Their terminology, not ours, but they're concerned about the quality of this particular ADU on site. And the term that was used was it looks a lot like a mobile home that will be brought in and deposited on site. They mentioned that there would be some concrete footings, but also skirting. So those are our questions about impacts on the neighborhood. It's in the same block face as 9th and 9th, which is very busy already. And Dave had some items that he wanted to address quickly.
Yeah, I would probably speak more to the technical issues, similar to the comments. Regarding your comment, Commissioner, about the need for conditional use review, I think it's valid when you have a predominantly single-family dwelling zoning district. You allow a number of these to come in, you effectively have rezoned it to an R2 at that point. And so I think it's a good process. It doesn't impede good cases, but still allows review of individual cases as they come forth. One of our concerns with this particular project was the documentation that was submitted. We felt was really lacking in detail. I mean, there's no indication on the site plan that shows how people walk to get to the ADU. Is there a concrete walkway? No indication whether they want to utilize the alley, which we highly recommend, because that would limit car shuffling in the driveway, which usually ends up on the street. So just a little more thorough, I think, preparation in terms of their submittal would be useful to us to evaluate it. A good example would be is if you're the adjoining neighbor and your bedroom is right near the property line, there's a long walkway that comes clear from the street past your window back to the ADU, you're going to be impacted by that depending on how active that ADU is. And so a little more information on the drawings would be helpful to us in terms of trying to make a decision such as that. Second point is this is new to the area in that we're getting manufactured homes being constructed there. They're built off site. The city code, where it talks about manufactured homes, it refers to certifying by a national organization and complying with all building codes. I guess our question is how is that verified? Whereas a house that's built on site gets inspected regularly, the drawings for the construction get reviewed by building services. With a manufactured home that's being dropped off and basically connected to a foundation, how are those standards enforced and inspected? That's a question from us that maybe staff can answer, or maybe it needs to be passed on to building services. But we've seen more of these. We'd like to know a little more information so that everybody's comfortable with what's going on. And we're open to any questions if you have any. Ooh,
Great.
Just under the limit. Now Paul doesn't have to throw me out.
Thank you very much for your feedback. Okay, I have two cards. One I'm going to read as the submitter does not wish to speak. It's from Michelle Dornan, and she has the following concerns regarding the proposed project. One, potential of added volume and wear and tear on community or common utility infrastructure. Two, potential of decrease in my property value and effect on my lifestyle due to increased population density, noise, etc. 3, what if property is sold, potential of less cooperative owner? And 4, precedent, will this make like projects easier to be approved, encouraging more like rentals in close proximity to my residence? Okay. That's not this one, okay. The next card I have is from Daryl High. Oh, that was you. Okay. Well, there we go. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to come forward and speak? Okay, please come forward and state your name for the record.
Just wanted to say, we had people that lived in apartments next to us in a basement apartment. My name's Josh Stewart. I live on 1867 Princeton. And we had like college students there, and they went to the medical school, and they were wonderful neighbors. They went to our local church congregation, and we were so glad to have them. And so the sky is not falling every time you add density to a community. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, one more, please come forward. Please make sure to state your name for the record.
Hi, I'm Kim Lofthouse. I'm actually the owner of the property. So I'd like to thank Andrea for taking care of the whole process for me, but I wanted to come to the meeting anyway and see what it was all about. So I just wanted to clarify some misinformation. The whole north side of my driveway, it actually goes from 9th East all the way to the alleyway. If I parked car per car, I could fit about 10 cars in there. So I park my car in the front in the driveway. I do put the garbage cans in there because I don't need all that space. And then there's probably enough for two parked cars in the back right next to the modal. So parking definitely won't be an issue. Let's see. Trying to think of, and everyone seems to be worried about the impact. I'm a single woman. I've lived there alone for 15 years. I'm one person on a .18 lot. So this is a tiny unit. It may have one person, it might have two people, but that's 3 people on a .18 lot. So I don't think we're over impacting the neighborhood. I've been there for 15 years. This is my forever home, so I plan to be there for a very long time. I love the idea of the modal for all the options. I have an aging mother. I have a large family. A nice little rental would be cool. But for me, it's whatever life throws at me. So I'm wanting it for different options.
And based on what you've submitted, the ADU will have parking off the alley,
Off the alley,
correct?
yep.
And then in terms of pedestrian access, the plan is if they wanted to get to 9th, they would walk through your property, potentially.
Not through my property. I'm going to actually have a little fence and create a little courtyard for them, so it's going to be in the alley. So they'll go through the alley to 9th, so there's only a couple doors down,
Okay,
or through the alley to come back. So the impact is in the alley, not through my driveway, not through my property. So I'm kind of creating like a little courtyard for its own house. I'm calling it the garden house. But so it may be comfortable for a future brother and sister, for an aging mom. It may be comfortable for, maybe if I travel, it might be comfortable for my personal little city house if I rent out my front house. So lots of options there, but definitely not high impact. It can only fit maybe one, maybe 2 people. So I'd say a couple for a very short amount of time, but one person could be comfortable.
great. Okay,
Hey,
thank you very
thank
much.
you.
So
Am
let
I
me
okay
just
to-
check and make sure there's nobody else who wants to speak at the public hearing. Okay, then we'll hear from, you can come back as the applicant.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to address one last issue. Appreciated the comments from the community council members and wanted to say that we appreciate their request for additional information on the site plans and showing additional access through alleyways and how we might impact surrounding neighbors. And we'll plan to do that moving forward. We show on the site plans the requirements that Salt Lake City requests from us. Additionally, wanted to address any concerns about the quality of the units. Manufactured homes traditionally have a stigma associated with them. We have a model home that any one of you are welcome to come tour. It was previously at City Creek Center. It's currently on the corner of 400 South and 900 East. By appointment, we love to take you through it and show you the quality. The quality that we build is far above and beyond what you'd find in a traditional manufactured home. It's built to the highest standard of the IRC, and there's a whole separate process that the community council members were asking about building services to make sure they're inspected in the factory. So that's all taken care of, but wanted to address that concern. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
You mentioned that these are manufactured at a off-site location.
Yes.
You probably already know that Salt Lake is an area prone to earthquakes and those kinds of seismic activities.
Of course.
Are your models prepared, or I guess designed, to resist this type of natural disaster, for example?
Yes, they are. So these homes, because they are built entirely in the factory and shipped down the road and then craned on site, as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of extra over-engineering involved structurally. So that impacts the earthquake ratings as well. We're currently working, although this is not entirely complete, it's a work in progress. We're working with Salt Lake City to approve a helical screw pile permanent foundation, which has superior earthquake ratings as well.
Okay. Another question is the plans that we received, that I received anyway, they're kind of sketchy and somewhat lacking in their information. Is that something that's usual for when you present, the way it's manufactured, et cetera, or maybe you're just putting things together and so information is coming and as you are planning this particular project?
Yeah, as more of these come through, because we currently have, I believe, our company has more than 30 that are going through just in Salt Lake City right now. Kimberly's was one of the first ones that came through, and it was a busy summer with construction, so we're just now here on the Planning Commission. And so a lot of the renderings and plans that we'll be submitting moving forward they're becoming more and more complete as we get into the process further. Any other additional questions?
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we will now close the public hearing and ask staff to come back. Chris? Does anybody have any additional questions for staff?
Yeah,
Darren,
sorry.
go for it.
Okay, I support ADUs. I think they're important. I think they're a really important part of solving our housing problems in the city. My concern is with this one that because it's a manufactured home, because there's no customization of it, it is exactly like the one we saw last month. However, the site conditions are very different. This one has an alley access, which in a lot of ways I think is super important. It makes it much easier for parking. It makes it much better in terms of access to that and congestion. However, the unit itself is not addressing that alley in any way. And if I remember correctly, the previous ADU ordinance, which is no longer in effect, didn't it require that properties with an alley address the alley and that the main entrance was from the alley? The idea being that it starts to add life to that alley and have kind of eyes on that, add light to the alleyway and make that more of a safe place. My concern is that west facade is 100% opaque and black, basically, and I feel like if that alleyway were lined with these units, no windows and no doors on that, then it becomes a pretty unsafe place to walk. So that's my question.
Yeah. For me personally, I can't answer that, seeing as I never had an ADU that I took through that process previously. I don't know the previous code well enough to be able to address that.
Chris, there are standards for entrance locations for detached and for attached ones as well. Excuse me. It says the entrance to an accessory dwelling unit. Wouldn't you know, I would scroll down. It's so facing an alley, public street, or facing the rear facade. So basically the doors can face one or the other. It's not facing the interior side yard so that you're not getting that activity on your neighbor's properties. That is kind of focused.
And I could be wrong, but I think the old one required that it face the alley. And that's something that I think is actually pretty important. So I think my concern with this is not the use, not the traffic, not the fact that you're adding another unit of density, or it's not a unit of density, I guess, but adding another dwelling unit to that street. But I do think that because it sounds like we're going to be seeing 30 of these come through, or a lot of them come through, I think that's worth noting that it's unfortunate to me that they're all the exact same and not taking into consideration specific site conditions. It sounds like there's nothing in the ordinance. That's why I asked the question at the beginning. It sounds like there's nothing in the ordinance that allows us to not approve this. And again, in general, I think ADUs should be approved where they're appropriate, but it feels unfortunate to me that we're going to get a bunch of these on alleys. There's a lot of alleys, and there's going to be they're not going to address the alley in any way. Is that anything that's not, because I did read that part of the ordinance pretty carefully, because this was something that, when I read the staff report, concerned me.
I think I have to agree with Commissioner, because I also think that at the very least, if you have a unit that's a modular manufactured unit, you at least need to show the development of the site in some detail. As we see in this picture, implies that there's a big sidewalk, that there's a patio, that there's a deck, all of those things. If you took that away and you had a bare yard in front of it, none of us would say, oh, this is great, you know. But since we have no idea what's going to be there, then we can assume a bare yard, you know. Now, I'm sure the owner would be horrified to hear me say this, because she just said, you know, we're going to make a little courtyard and we're going to do all these things. But that's kind of, I always tell my students, don't wave in the air, put it on the drawing. So in the future, I would like to require a site plan that actually has, you know, the driveway in it. I mean, right now, we've got a parking space that doesn't even have a way to get to it on the drawing.
And Commissioner, I did make a note actually about that already. But I do think it's important to realize this is not a design review. So this is not like with a plan development or design review when they come in. And
I'm not talking about design review.
Oh,
I'm talking about
know.
adequate drawings.
I was sorry. I was just responding to Commissioner Mono as well as your comment as well. But I definitely made that as a note that we want to, I think we should add some more details on some of these site plans. And the other thing is, just so you know, we are continually taking feedback on the ADU unit ordinance. I think when it was implemented and approved by the City Council, you know, it was new for us, and we were trying to make it work. So we have a long list of things that we'll be taking back to the City Council. They actually made it, I think, a condition that we come back after a year to kind of report back as to how it's working, what's functioning well, what's not, and what kind of additions or changes we need to or want to make. And so we'll definitely share this feedback with the council at that time.
Thank you.
So the current application is otherwise consistent with the city requirements for submittal?
It does meet the standards, yeah.
Okay.
And one thing to also, I think parking could actually be waived at this site because there's a bus line directly on 9th East, and they also have a usable parking spot in front of their house.
And the current code allows for blank walls? Okay. Any other questions for staff? Any other discussion among the commissioners?
I will say thank you to, is it Ms. Lofthouse for coming? I think it actually is important that that you are here. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Make a motion.
Okay. Dueling motions. Maureen?
Based on the information listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move the commission approve the request for the conditional use for an accessory dwelling unit at 942 South, 900 East, as presented in petition PLN PCM 2019-00651, with the conditions listed in the staff report.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Maureen, second by Matt. Let's go down. Darren?
Yes.
Andreas?
I'm really in favor of ADUs. I really like the idea of helping with density, but I feel I need more information in this particular case, and so we'll vote no.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Maureen?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes. Thank you all very much for participating.
Thank you.
All right.
This is also Chris's last meeting with us, so he's
Thank you,
leaving
Chris.
Salt Lake City for hopefully bigger and better. I guess we'll see, but
you
so
for-
we just want to thank him and
Yeah,
wish him
thank
luck.
you.
Where's he going?
Great, thank you. Good- Best of luck.
Did you hear the
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the special exception for an overheight fence at 762 West, 1355 South, which is case number PLN PCM 2019-00852. And Linda.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. So this item before you is a request for a special exception approval for an overheight fence in the front yard. Fences are permitted up to 4 feet high in the front yards, but additional fence height may be approved through a special exception. The applicant is proposing the additional fence height for increased security and crime deterrence. The subject property is located at 762 West, 1355 South, located in the M1 Light Industrial Zoning District. As shown in the top right corner is the subject property currently with the blue building, and it's being used as a woodworking mill with a warehouse area. Just a little brief history on this property. So in 2007, it had a single-family dwelling, but we allowed it to be demolished, in which case that 6-foot fence, chain link fence remained, and you can see that in the bottom, in the top left. And in 2014, a 7-foot high fence was installed in replacement of that 6-foot tall fence. And there's no evidence that the city permitted that. In the M1 zoning district, the front yard is the area within the 15 feet. It's hard to see there, but where the orange line goes up towards the property. So within this area, fences, walls, and hedges are limited up to 4 feet in height. As shown here in the orange outline, the applicant has proposed to install a 6-foot chain link fence in the front yard along the front and side property lines, and in addition to the driveway approach, with the intent to connect it to a gate. As mentioned before, additional fence height fences may be granted through a special exception if the proposal meets the general and specific standards of the special exception, and if it's determined that there will be no negative impacts upon the established character of the affected neighborhood and streetscape, maintenance of public and private views, and matters of public safety. 3 key issues has been identified through the analysis of the project. The first issue is the application has been elevated to a planning commission hearing for the reason that it does not comply with all of the general standards for considerations for a special exception. However, the subject property is located in an uncharacteristic industrial neighborhood and has the challenges to balance between 1, the residential industrial uses, and 2, the variation of existing front yard fences between the west and the east side of this block. The second item, or second issue, is the neighborhood compatibility. The subject property and majority of the surrounding properties are zone M1, light industrial. There are light industrial uses and residential uses within this neighborhood. The residential character on this block is anticipated to change because it's within the industrial corridor within the West Side Master Plan. But the master plan also recognizes the industrial corridor has inconsistent development patterns as residential uses abuts or surrounded by industrial uses. With the exception of the properties on the west side of the block, as shown in the images, the neighborhood character of the subject area primarily consists of fences that meet the current zoning ordinance. Therefore, the additional fence height would not be compatible with the surrounding uses and development or the neighboring properties. The third issue is security and impact on the neighborhood. The applicant is proposing an overheight fence on the property due to the neighborhood's susceptibility to crime. The request for additional fence height would increase security and safety, but with the recently constructed building on the property, it is unclear whether susceptibility of crime may change. The proposed overheight fence would have a negative impact upon the streetscape and character of the neighborhood. It would also be conducive to creating a precedent for the approval of front yard fences along the front property line. As noted in staff report, there was only one public comment received during the initial noticing, and staff has not received any additional comments since the publish of the staff report. So based on the information in the staff report, planning staff is recommending the Planning Commission deny the special exception request for an overheight fence in the front yard. This concludes
Great.
my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Did the applicant bring this to the city, or was there a complaint filed?
This is applicant initiated. They submitted a building permit, and the applicant is here tonight because they can elaborate on why that is, but there is not a enforcement that brought them to submit this application.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
You mentioned that it's in a light industrial area. Do other properties nearby have fences that are higher than the regular 4 or 5 feet?
So as noted in this previous slide here, I made a map, and it's in the staff report too. I highlighted the areas where there are fences along the front property line, and you can see it's in the orange where there's 6 feet high fences on the front property line. And the yellow is it's less than 4 feet high, and it's really the next door abutting residential neighborhood. And the one across the street, they do have 6 feet high fences, but it's actually flush with the front building facade.
Any other questions? Great. We'd like to hear from the applicant. He's here.
Yes.
My name is Wayne Gordon. I'm the representative for the client and the architect for the project. And first and foremost, your question about whether or not this was flagged, this came up as a plan review comment during the permitting process for planning and zoning. So that's where this was initiated. And like add a couple things. I don't know if it was 100% clear. That might have been my application. Sorry about that. But this is, we're requesting legalization of an existing fence and not putting a new fence up, if that matters. The fence was there when the property was bought, and we noted on our submission to the building department existing fence to remain as is, and then I guess they discovered that it had been put up without a permit. And would like to note that we request that it remains. If it's been up, I guess there were no enforcement calls or no comments, complaints by neighbors before when this was a vacant lot. I guess used the term mentioned earlier, negative impact. I guess we think since it was there before, we're moving sideways, not backwards. There's actually positively impacting the block. We now have landscaping in the front yard, which didn't exist before, stormwater detention. So it's the next rainstorm. His property is going to keep all the water on there. There's no curb or anything on the street right now. So we feel we're moving forward overall with stormwater detention. Landscaping, his parking will not be in the setback. That's, I think a lot of the properties on the street there have parking in the setback. We did propose to move the gate back to at least get that 17'6" setback, so his vehicles won't block the street. So that's,
Right.
I guess, sideways on the fence, forward in other ways. And
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant?
So clarify that. So you're not constructing new fence that goes down the sides of the driveway, and
we're leaving a fence that's there and relocating the gate to the east and then back.
but you're constructing new fence on the east side of the property to go all the way to the property line.
It's there's existing fence on the east side, and I think that actually belongs to the neighbor.
But on the front side of the property, because now, I mean, looking at the photograph, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to look at the tour, and so maybe one of the commissioners can weigh in, but it seems like it goes, you're still constructing, partially you're constructing a new fence. You have to be. There's not, it doesn't go all the way to the edge. Is that correct?
Maybe replacing fence that was there that had to be temporarily removed for the construction.
And Commissioner, I think that might have been where the gate was located, and the gate's
And the
been
gate, yeah, the
shifted
gate was on
right
the west
now
side.
temporarily,
Got
so.
it. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll
Let's
now-
stay up here, sit down,
No,
or come
please
back up?
sit-
Your choice.
sit-
Okay.
Yep, please sit down. We'll go to the public hearing. We'll now open the public hearing for this item. Is there anybody here from the community council who would like to speak? Is there anybody here from the public at large who would like to speak on this issue? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And we can bring the applicant and the staff back if we've got questions. Are there questions on the part of the commission?
I just have a question about the existence of the fence before, if that changes the calculation at all, or our analysis at all.
So with the existing fence, when the previous owner, it's my understanding the current owner acquired the land in early 2018. So the fence changed from 6 feet high, 6 foot high, to 7. And when they increased that structure, they lost that nonconformity because in the Chapter 38 on non-complying, there is a provision on non-complying structures that if the property owner or authorized representative voluntarily demolish or removes, they lose that. If they were to rebuild, they would have to build it to code. Therefore, in 2014, they would have had to project it further back at 4 feet or went through a special exception like today and also obtain a building permit.
Okay, thanks.
And we didn't always require fence permits in the past, but we have not allowed 6-foot fences in front yards even before the 1995 zoning rewrite. So that's not a new addition to the code.
And they could build a 6-foot fence farther back outside of the front yard setback,
Along
right?
15 feet towards the property, which would be their front yard setback requirement.
Any other questions for staff or the applicant?
It appears that there is a handicap parking space in the front yard of this. Is that allowed? Obviously it is.
Yes, so they already went through the building permit. This, I believe, received their certificate of occupancy within this last month, and so everything would have been reviewed by our building services.
So if we move the fence 15 feet back, then it would be in the middle of the handicap parking space. Is that correct?
Actually, the fence, or the parking spot is, I guess the curb on the side of the parking space is at the front yard setback. So the parking is not in the setback.
Nor its side area, that it's a handicap space.
Doesn't look like it. It looks like it's far enough back.
Okay.
What's a little,
Yes,
what might look a little tricky, the setback is 15 feet, but the gate for the driveway needs to be 17 feet 6 back.
I see.
Why not just build the fence 15 feet back?
It's site security. There's partially the required front yard landscaping in part so he and his dog could actually use that landscaping that's there. It would then be outside of the fence, and he would need to put in and maintain front yard landscaping, but it would essentially be a park strip that he couldn't get to and access. So that was played into
But
it.
Linda, they
going out
could
the
build a
gate.
4-foot fence where it currently is.
Correct. They can build anywhere within that front yard area up to a maximum of 4 feet in height.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay. Brenda? Let's hear it.
Based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented and input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission deny special exception request PLN PCM 2019-00852 for an overheight fence in the front yard.
Second.
Motion by Brenda, second by Darren. Okay, let's go the other way. Matt?
I probably don't object to this one outright, but I'm having a hard time finding an argument for you why it meets the standards. So I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, Weston?
Agreed. Yep.
Brenda?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Andreas?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Okay, so that was unanimous. I apologize. The motion for denial was approved. How about that? Inverse negatives. Thank you very much.
And can I add one more thing? Y'all could have just said no from the get-go, so we at least appreciate the chance to discuss it a little more with you. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for coming. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Fleet Block Zoning Map and Text Amendment, case number P. Oh, I can't read tonight or stay in order. Sorry. Alley Vacation at approximately 740 West, 900 South, case number PLN PCM 2019-00813.
Thank you, Chairperson. The petition for an alley vacation was submitted by a adjacent property owner, West End LLC, and the alley proposed to be vacated is a mid-block alley. It is a partial alley between Genesee and 900 South and runs east to west. It was created by the Cummings subdivision when the block was first subdivided and developed. Originally, the alleyway ran the entire width of the block, but was partially vacated in 1993. This partial vacation included the majority of the east side of the alley, but a remaining 32-foot long portion of the alley was left public. The proposed portion of the alley to be vacated measures approximately 32 feet by 15 feet. The adjacent properties to the proposed alley vacation are currently vacant. This is different than what was listed in the staff report. Last year, a business license was issued for an auto repair shop, but this year it's since been closed. So all the immediately adjacent properties are currently vacant. There are other alleys adjacent to this portion that's proposed to be vacated. The alleyways which run north to south and east to west, that's immediately west of this proposed portion to be vacated, will remain open. These alleyways are used by the surrounding property owners presently. There is a sewer main line that is currently in the location of this proposed alley vacation. The applicant is working with public utilities in creating a public utility easement so that the city is able to access that sewer main line. And so the first image on that slide shows the location of the alley and the gated entrance to one of the properties. Overall, this alley isn't really being used for anything since the immediately surrounding properties are vacant. And then the other three photos in the slide show the other remaining alleys which will be open and are presently used. So the staff recommendation is a little bit dynamic tonight. There is one last final change to it, which is the second condition shown on this slide. So staff finds that the proposed alley vacation meets the criteria for closing and vacating an alley, and therefore staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a favorable recommendation to the mayor to declare the alley surplus property and for city council to vacate the alley with one condition. And that condition is, the first condition, a public utility easement is submitted and recorded with the county at the time the alley is deeded to the surrounding property owners. The reason why the second initially recommended condition of approval has been eliminated is that at the time the ordinance would be published, the applicant isn't able to consolidate the parcel. So it's an impossibility for the applicant to fulfill that second condition. And that's why staff is recommending only one condition with a public utility easement be required.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions for staff?
Why was the second condition originally placed in there or contemplated?
So that was recommended initially by planning staff. The intent there was that the property, we wouldn't have small parcels all over that, all over the portion of the block where the alley is being vacated. But it's something that West End LLC will probably take care of with, since they are proposing to redevelop the site. So the consolidation isn't necessary with the favorable recommendation to City Council. Did I explain that well enough?
I mean, I guess I just didn't understand why a consolidated property from planning staff perspective is better than small properties.
This was an issue that my office identified. We've dealt with this in the past where we have, Adrian can probably explain conditions precedent and conditions subsequent better than I could. It's a condition that I think makes sense, but technically speaking, we can't publish the ordinance vacating the alley with that condition because they can't meet it until after the ordinance is published.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
But the consolidation makes sense. It's a good planning principle. It's one of these things that lawyers get in the middle of and say, we should probably drop that condition.
And Commissioner, I think I'm kind of get to your point. Why would we want to consolidate them? Generally, and it could end up being two properties. So, for example, one building is on one property and one is the other. It is we just don't want to have unusable, unbuildable parcels. And so, by vacating and become surplus, it would create this small parcel of property that, if it doesn't become a part of one of these adjoining lots, it's not developable and it would just sit there. So.
Oh, the alley itself needs to be consolidated, not all of the surrounding properties need to be consolidated.
Right, just that whatever that surplus property is
okay.
would become, yeah.
That makes much more sense.
Isn't that part of the process, though? It when they vacate, it then goes to the adjacent property owner, so it doesn't create...
So by operation of statute, there's a transportation statute that applies here that says that when we vacate an alley or a street or whatever, it goes to the adjacent parcel. The statute could be a little more clear that it's automatically merged, but it doesn't say that. It just says it goes to the adjacent parcel.
Oh, so in theory, you could have a tiny...
I don't know. And I think this was us just trying to be cautious and promote a good planning principle.
Okay, understood.
And this wasn't caught until like an hour ago, so I apologize, Nan, for putting you on the spot.
Well, it's something that we've done today, didn't
it's something we've done in the past, even though clearly it wasn't always great way to move forward.
All right, any other questions for staff? Is the applicant here?
He is.
Okay, they'd like to come forward and talk about the proposal. Please make sure to state your name for the record.
My name is Maximilian Careth. I'm the managing partner of Highboy Ventures, which controls West End LLC. Just to give you some background, we bought these two. We were fortuitous enough about less than, I think it was almost a year ago, we bought these two properties, and we bought them because they're beautiful buildings, and the idea really is to do an adaptive reuse to sort of bring more services to the community. Before we bought it, we talked a lot to community council, community about what they wanted there, and a lot of it was to sort of activate that alley. As you can see from the images, it's sort of a bit of a dead zone. So one of the things that we want to do with this development, we have these two buildings that are really sort of obviously not perfect images, they're a little bit offset, but to, like I said, bring services to the community and create sort of like a nexus of activity. And the idea is really to sort of reactivate the alley and make the entrance sort of between the two buildings, which is why we need this sort of little parcel, because that will be sort of like a public square where, you know, the two buildings sort of meet and you have some outdoor space, et cetera, et cetera.
Great.
There's one more slide. If you go to the next slide, there's a couple conceptual
You want to
renderings.
talk into this?
Yeah, can you make sure to state your name?
My name's Ian Percy. I work for Max here in Salt Lake. But just wanted to provide these renderings so you get a sense of what conceptually we're still in design on the project. The second image, where the archway is at, is literally where the alley vacation, the parcel that we're asking to vacate, is at. I think the other thing to note is that we have received an RDA loan for the project as well, which was unanimously approved back in October.
Great. Okay. Any questions for the applicant?
So who owns those vacant properties that are about the alley right now? Do you own them all, or
I'm sorry, say that again.
do you own all of the vacant properties that abut
Yeah,
the
the two
alley?
adjacent properties are the two buildings, yes.
Okay, so there's no other property owner that owns one of those vacant properties? at
No.
all? Okay.
Any other questions?
I do, sir. So regarding recording an easement because of the sewer line, why do you even need to vacate the alley if you're going to still have to maintain public access to get to that? How are you? Sometimes I don't understand why you want to take something out of a public use if you have to keep a public element to it.
Well, we couldn't build that public square because it's not our land. So you see where the arch
That
is?
public square, you're still going to have to maintain an easement so people can come in and rip it up if
Well, I
they
think
have to
we
get to the sewer.
Yes, I think we're fine with that. I think we can build around that. We just want to be able to join the two buildings to create that nexus of activity.
All right.
And just to confirm, Amy, the uses for an alley are different in scope than for, a sewer easement. So it's a different intensity and public intrusion on the
Well, it
land.
is a different intensity, but it's still an access issue. So
They legally build this with an alley? Is it true that they're not allowed to build on an alley? It would be a public land
Yeah,
use or
it's
something?
it's city-owned property, and so they can't use it for just a private owners for their usage.
Right.
And for the easement, they wouldn't be able to, for example, build a building over that. But if they could do plaza space and some
Can
limited
do hardscape
landscaping and
and
things
use
like
it
that,
for parking and access to their parking lot area. So, okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. We'll have you take a seat for a moment, and we'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody here from the Community Council to speak on this issue? Okay, seeing none. Is there anybody here from the public at large who'd like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, we will then close the public hearing. We'll bring it back to the commission. And we can have staff and the applicant come back if we've got questions. But any questions or comments on this? And again, just procedurally, we're making a recommendation to City Council, who is the final decision-making authority for alley vacations.
I'll make a motion.
Great.
Based on the findings listed in the staff report, is the planning, hold on. Staff recommendation, wasn't the motion there. All right. Based on the information in the staff report, I move the planning commission for a positive recommendation to the mayor and the city council on petition PLN PCM 2019-00813 regarding the Cummings subdivision alley vacation, and declare the surplus property and vacate the alley with the condition that the number 1 is added from the staff report.
Okay,
Second.
Motion by Matt, second by Weston. Start with Darren.
Yes.
Andreas?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Maureen?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Great. Motion passes unanimously. Great, thank you very much. All right, now we're on the last item on the agenda, which is the Fleet Block Zoning Map and Text Amendment, case number PLN PCM 2019-00277. Daniel.
Thank you. All right, so tonight I'm here with the full Fleet Block rezoning proposal for your consideration. It's been a few months since we brought this to Planning Commission back in July for a briefing. Since that time, we've made some changes to the code, put it out for public comment again, made some small tweaks, and are now back with the final proposal. So since we made some changes to the code, I know most of the commission was here in July for the briefing. I'm still going to touch on some of the major points, but also try to focus on the changes that we've made. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the Fleet Block is the 10-acre block between 3rd and 4th West and 8th and 9th South, and the city owns about 8 acres of the property, and then the private owner owns a small corner of the property. So just for context, this was used for fleet operations for decades. The current zoning is public lands, limited to public facilities, and also the private portion is general commercial, which allows for a variety of commercial uses but has no design standards. The downtown plan calls for the Fleet Block to have the best of urban family living and industry, the mixing of land uses once thought to be incompatible, and improve the connections that focus on putting people first. So for more context, this is surrounded by D2 zoning on the south and the north, and then CG predominantly on the west side of the property. So the main components of the form-based urban neighborhood 3, the main points, is that it does allow for mid-rise heights, it does have design controls, and it will allow for a broad mix of uses from residential, row homes, townhomes, up to light industrial uses like light manufacturing. And with a form-based code, you have a building form, and then has bulk controls, heights and setbacks, design standards, things like windows and entries, lists of land uses, streetscape requirements, parking, and sign standards. So the main difference with the proposal from July is that we took out the limited bay form from the allowed building forms. So what we're proposing now is allowing for a row house building form, as well as what is the vertical mixed use, multifamily, and storefront building forms. The limited bay was pretty much essentially like the vertical mixed use building form. It just had a slightly lower height allowance, and the key thing was it allowed for a front-loading bay. Because they were so similar, we just got rid of the limited bay building form and just incorporated that front-loading bay allowance into the vertical mixed-use multifamily storefront building form. These are the row house standards. One thing that came up at the Planning Commission briefing was that maybe we should get rid of the 40-foot height allowance for row houses and just have a higher height allowance. We thought about that a little bit, but ultimately determined that a building higher than 40 feet should have a greater contribution to the public realm to bring some sort of level of activity on the street level, which are required with vertical mixed-use building forms. So we kept the row house limit at 40 feet, and if someone is going to build a taller structure, they would have to comply with the other building form requirements for vertical mixed use.
Row houses are strictly residential, or?
Yeah, strictly residential. These are the bulk standards for the vertical mixed use. They're predominantly the same as they were in July. The max height is mid-rise, allowing up to 125-foot height allowance. Tallest buildings over 85 feet have to go through a design review process, which means that it would come before the Planning Commission. The key difference with this building form is that we did incorporate that front-loading bay allowance into the building form regulations. Design standards, these are all the same in all the form-based zones, entryway requirements, glass minimums, blank wall limits. The same standards that apply in all those form-based zones would apply here. Land uses, again, the broad list of allowed land uses. One of the key changes to the land uses is that we are prohibiting warehouse and storage uses along the ground floor next to the sidewalk because they really have no pedestrian engagement. It's kind of a dead space, so we took those out. You could still do that behind a more active use, hidden behind that more active use on the ground floor. There's also the parking location limits, side and behind. Parking is allowed side or behind buildings. Sidewalk requirements 8 feet. Street trees every 30 feet. Mid-block walkways were identified in a city master plan. And the sign allowances in this zone are fairly similar to the Sugar House zone, downtown zones. So the changes since July, again, we eliminated the limited bay form and incorporated that loading bay allowance into the other forms. One of the other key things is that we are now proposing to require more active uses like retail, restaurants, bars, businesses with publicly accessible portions of their business right up front on the ground floor. Those would be required when you're facing 900 South.
Like a lobby for a apartment building?
A lobby would qualify if it was publicly accessible, yeah. This is intended to ensure more active uses along the 900 South Greenway 9-line trail, which is that connection from the east side of the city to the Jordan River. The city intends to do some significant infrastructure improvements ultimately in the long term here. So this would require more active uses along that street, along 900 South. And as part of that, townhomes would be required to have a live-work component or a work component on the ground floor. For greater context, the ground floor requirements of 14 feet would apply for any of the vertical mixed use, multifamily, and storefront. That's to encourage higher activity commercial uses, but not outright require them everywhere. It may not make sense to require those uses throughout the granary, and we're intending to look at expanding this zone out to the rest of the area around the fleet block. The other key thing was prohibiting warehouse and storage uses, again, from street-facing ground floors. We also incorporated an allowance for row house lots without direct street frontage. This is pretty similar to what you saw with the RMF 30 proposal that came before the Planning Commission a couple months ago. This would allow row houses that aren't directly adjacent to the street to be carved out as their own lot and sold. We would require that there would be easement for guaranteeing access back to those properties. They'd have to provide documentation that they could maintain all the private infrastructure that they ultimately would share. Very similar to the RMF 30 allowances. Additionally, we did do some various code language clarifications just to prevent any code conflicts or misinterpretations. So with that, that's really all I have. We're hoping for a positive recommendation in the City Council tonight, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes,
Questions?
Daniel, I have one.
Great.
So one of the things that that was a red flag for me was the parking. So not just in the fleet block, but anywhere, I would hate to see an island of parking in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you specified in your report that you felt any interior type of treatment would perhaps be handled in an RFP or community involvement of how they wanted that block to develop. But this plan specifically says parking must be on the side or behind. Does that prohibit then perhaps doing underground parking or a concentrated parking deck in one area so that it wasn't all over? That's what I'm really,
No.
I want to make sure those are not prohibited by specifying in this parking has to be on the side or behind.
So the intent of that is for surface parking. So any surface parking, we can add clarification. I guess it calls it out as surface parking locations located behind the building or to the side of a building. I think as long as we have that language that says it's surface parking
Yeah,
in
and
the
I
table,
think, but I do also think saying surface parking, then you are encouraging that we then have an interior of parking, surface parking lot. And that mitigates then any opportunity the community may want to bring up to do something different, like a courtyard or a more active walkway. By specifying surface parking has to be behind. In some ways, you're basically saying this is what's going to happen by not allowing, that's what I'm worried about.
Okay.
And I don't know the best way to get there, but I'm worried that calling it out in the way that it does, that's what we're going to end up with.
So I guess just to clarify, we have similar regulations in the Sugar House zone, in our downtown zones, and
Yes, and we've seen what's happened. That's what's happened in Sugar House.
So what it does is prohibit parking from being in front of a building, being right against the
I like
sidewalk.
that. So I don't know that. I don't want to have parking separate the street from the building. I do like that. But if
Yeah.
you look at Sugar House as a case example, the Sugar House where Barnes and Noble is and Bed Bath and Beyond. Okay, that's a cluster inside there.
Right.
It's a cluster for a pedestrian. It's a cluster for the cars. Right, and so we've concentrated it there. We made this island where we developed all around it, and then we have a cluster going on in the middle. So we haven't increased pedestrian, and some of it looks nice because they've opened the creek, but we didn't increase pedestrian movement or safe connectivity, and cars are just crazy. So I don't know that that's a great example of what's going to work for the sleep block or for anything in the future. And I don't know where the sweet spot is.
Yeah.
To not have parking separate from the street, because I agree that's a killer for that engagement, but then concentrating in the middle, I have yet to see a well-functioning one that still puts the pedestrian kind of at an equal level. Because if I just look at what's there, it's really not a great design. I wouldn't want to emulate that anywhere else. And I'm just worried, as I read that, I felt like in a way that was almost what it's saying you needed to do.
So you would have to have structured parking. I mean, that's the only.
Am I misunderstanding? There's minimum parking is 0.
Right.
In this area. So you could actually have 0 parking.
Correct.
For the whole block and
Right.
have up to 120 something feet, right?
Right, yeah.
So I think actually it sounds like because the minimum parking is 0, hopefully we wouldn't get Sugar House, but we could, is what I think you're saying. Is there a maximum parking?
Yeah,
There is a maximum parking.
Or a maximum, there is?
There is, and it's lower than most of our other zones because it has
Lower
a 0. I think it's 1.
The Barnes and Noble development in Sugar House?
Yeah, I think that was developed under a prior parking code where we had higher allowances, but and most of those businesses are accessed internally from that parking structure rather from the parking lot rather than the street.
I like that as well.
Sorry.
So, well, bye.
Oh.
I want to speak to what you're saying because I think it goes to the whole ordinance, which is that there's no assumption of any lots here. If you have no lots and no streets, then you have one big lot. And when you say put it behind, you're putting it in the center of the block with everything else around it. And maybe a mid-walk walkway walking through it. I mean, without the structure of lots and streets, you got nothing. You don't have a plan.
Yeah.
These zoning regulations mean nothing without that structure. Everything depends on streets. Every drawing you have depends on streets. And those 4 edges, a square has 4 edges still, right?
Yeah.
Those 4 edges still don't have, that's not enough for a 10-acre development. And so why aren't we talking about a plan for this block that has streets and open spaces and sidewalks and walkways and so forth? Why are we talking about a zoning ordinance which is not a plan? A zoning ordinance is not a plan. Why are we doing that?
I think the thought is that we would get there to the planning through the RFP process. It's been we've been trying to get some sort of zoning in place so we can actually say that these sorts of uses are allowed. Right now, it's zoned public lands, which is pretty limited. You couldn't do any sort of private development. So this is just to get that in place, and then we could...
You could say this is a mixed-use you could go with any of the mixed-use zones without creating your whole new zone, and I just don't understand this process, because every single thing about this document is referring to things that are not there. And when you do go through an RFP process, it's going to be a planned development. It's not going to be part of this form-based codes.
It would have to follow the form-based code provisions.
Not entirely. Not if it's a planned development.
It could propose
modifications, which this body would see and could say no to.
But I think if you don't say in this that, there's a maximum block size here, for example, you could say, let's have a maximum block size. And I'm sorry, 10 acres ain't it.
Yeah. The tricky thing is that we could say there's a maximum, for example, we could say there's a maximum block size, but if you have an existing lot, you can develop that lot. I think through the RFP process, we've been considering how to exactly break up this block and sell it in pieces, which to reserve for city uses, which to reserve for streets. We just haven't been considering it through this zoning itself.
So does the city plan to subdivide it before issuing the RFP?
That's been the thinking. There are some constraints there about subdividing, putting in streets before we actually have development because of the expenses. But the thought is we'd break it up.
Approved. I mean, you could identify where you want the streets to be located, and then that when the developers come in, it's their obligation to construct the infrastructure.
We could to an extent, except once we get approval, we have to bond for those new streets and put up money up front, which has made things difficult in the past for the city. We've run into that with Station Center, where we've platted it, but then ultimately couldn't put the street lock in that platting because we didn't have the funds to bond for the streets themselves. It's kind of a complicated...
But even the city has to bond for its own public streets.
It was an RDA, yeah, yes.
Okay, interesting.
It was the RDA going through that, and it sort of put pause on actually putting those property lines in.
Okay.
So
If
one
I
other
could,
thing
sorry, I was just kind of, I think it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. I can totally understand what you're saying. We need a plan, but we also need zoning. In the 10 years I've been here, I have seen lots of plans on the fleet block, lots of pie in the sky plans. Some were more realistic than others, but it was nothing but drawing. So there wasn't any real meat to it. It was just an idea that somebody came to us, this is a great idea. And there were some really great ideas on there. I'm not trying to discount any of those plans. But this helps cement it and root it in reality by having standards. I think that's an important way to look at it. I think second is we want to look at this outside of using it on this block, which most of them aren't owned by one single entity. But in this case, this one is owned by one single entity, meaning we have complete and total control over what's going to happen on that block. And I can tell you whether it's who working on the new administration, no one's going to go out with an RFP that says, let's put a 5-acre surface parking lot in the middle of the block and then surround it by one giant building. Like, that's just not going to happen. I think that anything like that you said is going to have to be a plan development. And if you look at the policy statements that are in here and in the downtown master plan, it would never support any sort of plan like that.
So one of the other things you mentioned in your report is not wanting to designate where a mid-block walkway would go, but that it would defer to where it is listed in the master plan. Where exactly does the mid-block walkway fall on the master plan?
It lies directly in the middle.
Northwest, east side.
Yep, yeah.
There was so much in there. It was like...
I'm sorry.
So it was north-south to east-west? Which one?
Right. There's two.
Oh,
there's
so
one that
like
goes north-south and one that goes east-west. And it's in this visual here from the downtown plan.
It's pedestrian only, though, not vehicular.
Correct. Yep.
Right. And so that's what's identified in the master plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have one other question, because you said these were currently zoned public lands. Have you done the disposition of land from the public? Because when they're zoned public land, don't they have to be disposed of from that particular zoning?
That was through, if they're designated as an open space, they have to go through a special
If it's open
disposition
space,
process.
it has to go through disposition.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, any other questions for Daniel?
My question, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I had it before. But so it seems like now the only thing that really is in the code that breaks up the block is a 200-foot restriction. Is there other strategies that encourage different types of development, structures, buildings, uses other than just a 200-foot length restriction?
There's the blank wall limit. You can't have a blank wall longer than 30 feet. But then as far as buildings go,
that's not very interesting. That doesn't do it here.
Sometimes it doesn't. We've reduced that in other zones to 12 feet because 30 feet is kind of far. The tricky thing is that that's in the general design standards for the form-based code, and we mostly didn't tweak anything in those because they apply to all of the form-based zones in this area of the city.
Is 200 feet the right building? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people, I shouldn't have the right vision for anything in particular, and I've gone after the length of buildings before. 200 feet is substantially shorter than we have approved in other zones, so thank you for that.
Right.
I still think, based on the neighborhood, it seems like you would have lots of smaller buildings, and not 9 200 by 200 like Borg cubes. I mean, because that's what could go in under the zoning, right? Is 9 200 by 200 Borg cubes.
Potentially, yeah.
Is 200 feet the right length? Why was 200 feet chosen? How mad are you going to be if I push on that one?
The 200 feet was also part of the form-based code. It's one of our lowest allowances that matches the TSA allowance. It's tricky. It gets into the economics of the development. We have set that 200-foot limit in other zones, and we keep getting requests for longer buildings that go through a process.
I don't care about that.
And
those requests.
I want to jump in here. I think it's really difficult actually to put in a zoning ordinance the length of a building, because it's really impossible to know until you have a specific lot with a specific use what is appropriate in terms of a length. And so I think it's hard to just say a number. I think that leads to doing like a lot of, you can look at zoning ordinances throughout the state, and there's a lot of times when it's like, it just doesn't make sense for a given property. So I think whether 200, for me, it's not whether 200 or 30 are the right numbers. It's the fact that that's actually really hard to deal with as a designer. So I don't know what the correct answer is, but I think whether it's 150 or 200
you will get 200 feet with 30
250.
feet. That's what's going in. I'm just telling you. You will get 200 feet with 30, especially
which
when the
might
block's not
not
broken
make
out.
any sense for that specific project. So to me, that whole 200 thing, I don't like that to begin with. I'm obviously on the other end of the fence than you, but I think actually that should go away. But
All right, any other questions for
I
Daniel?
have a question, a curiosity. When developers come to you to ask for permission to build something, for example, in this case, do you give them renditions of the designs you showed us today, or do you kind of just leave it up to them and say, hey, whatever you want to design, come on back and we'll go over it? How does that process work, maybe? In short.
We have a couple pre-development meetings available that people can come to. Generally, they will come in with just a site plan and maybe some boxes shown on
So
a
they
site
come
plan.
to you with their designs, and then you look at them and see if they fit into what you have.
To some extent. We generally are doing a zoning review. If they're asking for modifications, then we'll get more into the details of the design they're showing us and kind of give them some sort of impression on, we don't think that would fly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Andres, you're asking about just in general or for this fleet block specifically?
In general.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Daniel at this point? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Daniel. Now open the public hearing. Is there anyone here from the community council? Okay. I have a card from Daniel Stevens. Would you like to come forward?
Name's Daniel Stevens. I represent Heinz, which is a development company here in Salt Lake City, and we have some land in the close proximity to the fleet block that we are planning a multi-phased, multi-use development on. And so just wanted to address a couple of points that as we reviewed this document, that I shared similar concerns on trying to zone a full block that we don't really understand what it's going to be yet. And we plan to be one of the developers that intends to chase the RFP to try and tie up the fleet block. We actually have interest in the corner that is not the public piece that is owned by Century Financial currently. We'll be co-developing that parcel with them. And so just representing them and wanting to talk about a couple of the things that we came. You know, as we travel the country as Heinz, we're locally based here in Salt Lake City, but Heinz is an international development company, and we've seen a lot of these areas, like in the Granary District, just organically grow in places like Portland, on the east side of Portland, on the east side of Austin, and in the Rhino District in Denver. And it's fun to watch the organic growth in these areas in these art districts where their creative community goes down and opens up bars and restaurants that are iconic to the area. And you see a lot of public art on the sides of walls that used to be called graffiti and now are called murals that the public can really enjoy. And so we saw that in the Granary District, and that was part of the reason what has driven us to tie up land in this area, is to take advantage of that organic movement and the organic growth in these types of areas. And so we want to be able to, you know, I think the idea of putting restrictions and parameters in place makes sense, but we also don't want to impede the organic feel and growth in these types of areas as, you know, it's as driven by market demands. And so a couple of things that I wanted to address today in particular are, you know, one of the things that we thought that this did not address was a large-scale development in the sense of Heinz has developed a heavy timber office building in a bunch of different areas around the country, which is it's a heavy timber, cross-laminated timber building. It's 85 feet tall, so it stays within the, you know, the parameters that you've got here. But it's a 210,000-foot building, office building. And so if you talk about having a, you know, on the ground floor, restricting it to strictly retail or other uses like that, just wanting to make sure that it would also include lobbies for office use. Because one of the plans that we have initially is the corner of the fleet block on the southwest side there would actually be one of these heavy timber office buildings. And then also the restriction of having only one entrance per face. I think if we were to build an office building there, we would want one there, and to divide the block, you would probably want one on your side as well. So just thinking about, and then having multiple uses on this block. The other thing would be the one entry per every 75 feet. You know, I think the intent, I understand the intent there, but again, if we're building a more larger scale office building or a bigger type building in the area, that may not work for a entry point, but for fire code, fire exiting, and things like that, we would obviously adhere to those things. The quality exterior building materials, we would fully intend to have a beautiful building that would be well received by the public, but restricting it to certain things such as brick and concrete, I think it constrains what we can do with building materials, especially nowadays. You see a lot of exposed steel in columns, or heavy timber buildings have exposed heavy timber on the exterior. Corten metal is another building material that's been used in these types of areas that's very unique. So I know my time's up, so appreciate the time and look forward to being back in front of you with other project plans, but just keep in mind large-scale development, I guess.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here? Great, you can come forward and
Oh, yeah.
state your name.
Josh Stewart. I live at 1867 Princeton. I'm an architect. Daniel's just pulling up a graphic. I included this in my comments on this fleet block. And yeah, okay, wonderful. Thank you, Dan. I just wanted to flip through a few slides just to talk about, and I agree with Brenda's comment about, like, if you don't have a plan to go along with this zoning, you don't have much. So, you know, my point was, you know, we need to look at what we're going to do with these 10-acre blocks, and, you know, 4.4 acres is public right-of-way. Wide streets, long blocks make it more dangerous, less convenient for pedestrians. Wide streets are dominated by asphalt rather than more smaller scaled streets. Angled parking has more use and slows the traffic, but is not great for pedestrians, is rather ugly. Okay, so when you break it down, you got 4.4 acres that are city-owned, but what can we do with, you know, these mid-block crossings? And my hope is that they're more than just pedestrian, that we have roads that go through that will make it actually safer for the pedestrian, because you get eyes on the street and makes it more dynamic. And so there's opportunity to change up these, you know, you could do, this could be a development, you know, I mean, that's, if we just bisect this block, we've missed our opportunity to do something great, you know, and we've got to have some plans to, like, you know, you could do something like this where it breaks it up, and you know, like Savannah, Louisburg Square in Boston, you know, we've got to have some open space integrated into this zoning. You know, we could really break this up. You know, we could create stuff like this. I mean, we've got to have a plan to go along with this. And my issue is the connectivity needs to be addressed. We need to have real roads, real plan, real open space, all designed. And you could put out an RFP to get planners to come in and plan it. And then maybe the way that it gets broken up, you might have different zoning on the different blocks that it breaks it up into. So it's not really good to just overlay this with one zone, because it could be totally dynamic space. So anyway, this is just my comments that, you know, we need to raise the bar a little bit. I mean, we got to do better than the hardware development over there. I mean, that was ended up pretty sad. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much. And there's one last comment card I'm going to read from Tim Dwyer. The proposed FBUN-3 zone has no practical considerations for parking, a key requirement for the successful development of a generally urban, dense, and diverse development located between two freeway access points. As an existing business next to the fleet block, we already see a lack of parking in the area and are concerned about the unrealistic view of parking requirements for fleet block under the proposed FBUN-3 zoning text. Recommend to reject current proposal. Is there anyone else here who wishes to speak? Okay, come on forward. Please make sure to state your name for the record.
Hi, my name's Chris Demiri. I have some property in the granary that's nearby. So I know that pretty soon my zoning will probably get pushed to whatever this is. So that's why I have an interest in it. I'm one of the guys who, like he said, the artists go in first and then the businesses follow. And I think unchecked, if you let the developers come in, they'll build block to block condominiums, because that's what they can make the most money on. And at the street level, instead of engaging pedestrians and having business, you'll have entrances and lobbies to condominium towers and weight rooms and entrances to parking structures. So that's what's happening all along the 4th South Corridor. The street has become, the city's becoming sort of an urban desert a little bit. There's blocks where you don't even want to walk because there's nothing to see except for, you know, entrances to parking structures and weight rooms for condominium complexes. So I would hope that somehow, and I think he's brought some good ideas up of forcing commercial stuff on the first floor. I hope that somehow they can preserve why the granary is interesting and not let the developers make those choices, because we know what choices the developers will make. They'll just, condos all the way up. So I would be against the row house thing. I think that sort of doesn't work. I mean, we obviously need housing, and the whole top half of that building should be that, but hopefully it can be something more creative and better on the first floors. And my business, I have a business that's right around the corner from there. And so, I want it to be successful. I want more people to want to use the 9-line corridor when it goes in. And if it's just, the side of a parking structure and a bunch of ventilation shafts, nobody's going to be interested in it. So thanks for listening, and thanks for your service, everybody.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, I think we've covered everyone. I will now close the public hearing. Discussion, thoughts among the commissioners?
I think we've had some really good comments from the public just now. In the last 10 minutes, I really have felt, what's the right word, uplifted? I don't know. I've been informed and educated on a lot of the issues that are really valid for this particular type of the development, and I think we should take them into consideration when designing something of this magnitude.
So Commissioner Scheer talked about block size and how 10-acre block is not appropriate, and I think that's similar to what Mr. Stewart said. Given that this is a zoning ordinance, not a plan that we're reviewing, is there anything in a zoning ordinance that could restrict lot sizes or require mid-block streets rather than mid-block crossings? Is that something that was considered?
You could make that mid-block pedestrian walkway requirement. You could write something that would require a street through it.
In
It's
a
probably
zoning ordinance?
Sorry?
In a zoning ordinance, you could
In a zoning ordinance, you can. We typically deal with that through subdivision process, where we've actually have on our major street plan where a future road should go. It's trickier through a zoning ordinance. If it's the fleet block that's city owned, you probably can accomplish that without a property owner potentially saying we're exacting their property.
If this were to get applied to the block to the west or to the north, and there's a property owner that owns a small lot right in the middle of the block where the master plan calls for a future road or street to be, then basically that would be taking their property.
Essentially, yes. So a walkway, maybe not so much because it's smaller, but a roadway potentially could be viewed as that.
Could it be something that any new zone or any new subdivision is a maximum of X number of square feet, X number of acres that would not allow one? I think what we all want is to not have one mega building that's enormous and out of scale, but
you could set a maximum block size that would apply for any property that's being subdivided.
Did you look at a maximum square footage for lots?
As well, yeah, that as well.
Did you consider it or explore that or think about it, or do you have a recommendation or thought on that?
We didn't, generally because we viewed this as an urban zone, and none of our other city downtown urban zones have lot size limits. We generally have had those in our residential zones, but not in our commercial or downtown zones.
And I think it's important to point out that would only apply to if you were subdividing a property. If you had an existing property, despite its maximum, if you put a maximum size, it could always develop. However, the building lengths and those things that are in place would require multiple buildings.
I want to address other things that were in the public comments that were included in the staff report. There was one that talked about existing buildings and how some of the new ordinances would limit rehabilitation of existing buildings. Did you look at those, and is that true, what is being said? And if so, do those requirements apply to existing buildings?
No. So you don't just have to upgrade your building because you're doing like internal upgrades to your space. If you're actually modifying the exterior, you could have to comply. One example is if your windows already comply with the minimum window glass requirement and you wanted to reduce that, we would say no. Yeah. or entryways. If you already had entryways that met it, we wouldn't let you just get rid of those entryways.
But what if you have an existing building and you want to do a pretty substantial remodel of it, but the seismic restrictions on that building don't allow increasing more glazing on that facade? Are there exceptions in the zoning that would prevent that from being forced to be torn down? Is that my question clear?
Yeah.
Because I could see it, we want to preserve the existing building stock. I do, at least, and I think that that's important for that zone and that area. But if somebody wants to do a pretty substantial remodel, change the use perhaps, upgrade it seismically, but there's certain things that the shape of the building, it doesn't have 14-foot ground floor, or it doesn't have the 30-foot setback requirement or things like that.
They wouldn't have to comply in those cases.
Is that written in the zoning?
Yes, it's in our non-conforming use chapter, which is outside of this chapter, but all those provisions apply. It would only apply again if you're doing modifications that are making it less complying somehow with exterior modifications.
Okay, and you could become more conforming. For example, if you didn't have any glass, you could put in more glass, and it doesn't mean you have to necessarily meet the standard.
You can
because you're
become
increasing
slightly
the
more
standard. You're becoming
conforming, but not completely.
Thank you. You mean more conforming, you can't become less conforming.
Or you could get a planned development. I mean, if you wanted to be fully compliant and have all approvals for your design, you could do that.
Yep. Go through design review or through plan development.
Yes.
But you have looked at that public comment, and you don't think that that's going to be a problem?
No.
Because I think that's actually really important that we don't create zones or zoning ordinances that mean existing buildings get demolished.
I would love it if we were reviewing this zoning ordinance in relationship to an existing area like the rest to a place which has existing buildings, existing smaller streets, existing alleyways, existing lots. That makes so much more sense, and I don't think I have a huge number of problems, but I still have a huge number of problems. I still have some problems with the ordinance in that direction, so I will speak to that right now, okay? Number one, wherever the mid-block walkways are, locations should be flexible. They should not necessarily have to be in the middle. I mean, I think Mr. Stewart gave us a pretty good example of several places, several different potential designs that would not be this unimaginative cross in the middle of the street, which, by the way, doesn't exist anywhere else in Salt Lake City. So we'll take our history lessons there. I think I would not allow townhouses or anything else to have no street frontage. That will require streets to be built. And also, if that's not acceptable, then they at least have to be on a public mid-block walkway or something of that nature, so that they occur in a little, even if it's a walkable pedestrian street, they face onto that street. I think if you have them as a separate sort of thing out there, as of right, now we do approve those all the time, but if you have them as of right, what will you get is, well, I used to live in Houston, and they have apartment complexes that go on for miles and miles with no streets, just parking lots. That's it. And so sure, they don't face streets, they don't face anything. So that, I think, if you either have to face the street or you have to face a mid-block walkway or public way of some kind, or you don't. Huh? Well, but space in between them has to be public.
Yeah.
So that's a mid-block walkway. Open space. Mr. Stewart, by the way, has sent us a wonderful letter, which I took the bother of copying because I wanted to make sure that all of his, knowing he would only have 5 minutes, I wanted to make sure that some of his points got made. In terms of open space, I don't know how you get to the point from a zoning ordinance which allows you to have, like 10 foot by 10 foot in your yard of your townhouse to a real open space. How do we get that? How do we require that of a person who is building a 200-unit building? Is that part of the open? I mean, there's a 10% open space which they can use for their roof.
Right. And we have generally gone away from requiring large open spaces in our downtown zones and our sugar house zones because we ended up with sort of dead spaces next to buildings.
Right.
So it does make it difficult. We have sometimes gotten better results through a design review process. If you're over a certain size of building, design review kicks in also an open space requirement, but we did also remove that from our design review code just within the past year because
I think one might be able to, instead of having their own personal little, piece of lovely green space that's 10 by 10, be able to contribute a certain portion of land to a public open space nearby in the same block.
Well, I think in a perfect world that would make sense. I mean, I think everybody recognizes having larger open spaces that are public and usable are the way to go, and I'm sure that in the RFP there will be something about that because I know it's been in all the discussions. But to tell a developer that you are now required to develop open space on someone else's property, then we get into a lot of trouble.
Right, I understand that, but I think as a condition of perhaps of the open space, an option would be to, not necessarily the only thing you can do, but an option to contribute. I mean, we had some pretty big projects come through here lately that have zero public open space.
I think the other thing to consider is that this neighborhood isn't going to develop at the same time. And so could you end up, yes, you contribute to a fund or something like that. Well, it may not be in the same neighborhood. It may not happen because the other parcels don't develop in that area or they don't develop for a long time. I definitely respect what you're saying and I can see that. And I think on this block that we, as a city as a whole, as planning staff, as planning commission, we want to see great open spaces, and I think that that's something we'll take to the administration when we're looking at that RFP. But to try to write that into a zoning ordinance, I think would be very difficult without stepping on takings and exactions and those sorts of
Well,
things.
that's why I'm asking the question, is there a way?
But isn't, the city owns the property. The
Yes.
city can control when it develops the
Yes.
property and impose.
City can set aside.
City can
Yes.
set aside open space and the city can structure the disposition any which way it wants to.
Correct.
So I think a large number of these issues could be addressed through the development process and how you structure each RFP and how that process fits together to achieve these master planning goals that the zoning would then support.
Correct, yeah. And that's generally been our perspective in doing this zoning.
I'm also concerned about allowing a driveway per frontage, whatever frontage means. What does frontage mean?
It's the front property line that is adjacent to the street or right of way.
Okay, for
That
each
is your
lot,
frontage.
for each project, for each building, for each what?
So each frontage is allowed, each width of your front property is allowed one driveway.
So if I have a townhouse and it's 15 feet wide, I can have.
There are other limits to that in that your driveway can't be more than 50% of the width of your house. So
Okay,
you're
so
unlikely.
I have 5 foot wide lots. Then I still have 8 foot.
You could have that. Yeah, with a row home development, you could potentially have that if they were individually platted. If it was one long building and owned by a condominium association or apartment, you couldn't do that. But
Right.
there could be an outlier case, yeah, where each is an individual lot and you could have
But you're allowing this as of right. So with the zoning
Correct.
code, you would allow this. This would not be something we would be able to talk about. This
Right.
would just happen. This
Right.
would happen on, maybe not 9th, but 8th, 4th, all the other places. It could happen, right?
I think you're right.
Okay. Well, this may be something to concern ourselves with, especially if you're allowing as of right. Okay, I've got a lot more, but it's late, so I have sympathy for everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brenda. Any other questions, comments, discussion among the commissioners? Is anyone willing to entertain a motion?
I mean, what I'm working through is I do think that the zone is done well and appropriate for the space, which is the standards of what we're looking at. And what just complicates is you have this weird blank slate that has created some unique opportunities that's hard to figure out how this applies. I mean, if you were coming to here and saying we're rezoning the spot, was already, already developed and everything, the height, the width, all makes sense. And that's all I'm trying to weigh is essentially we just started trusting the city to then do a good job.
Yes. Also,
and I like most of the people in the city. I really do. That's essentially what the deal is, though. Is it's like, I think that most of the commission agrees that most of this is consistent with the area and would fit and meets the standards of a zoning change.
I'm generally in favor of the way that it's written. I think I don't have the benefit of having been here in July when it was first proposed, so I didn't dig into it that deep until now. So I think I'm having a hard time knowing that it's correct, given that it's just such a big decision and has so many implications that we don't understand, that we can't really foresee. So I think it's good, but I'm having a hard time wanting to make a motion on that,
If you guys would like to, and just this has been going, like we said, we've been talking about the flea block longer than I started here. And so it's very important that we do it right. No elected official wants to walk away from that project and think, wow, we messed up. So most certainly we don't want to see that. And I have faith in our newly elected administration and staff members to say that it's not going to turn out garbage. No one wants to be ashamed of it. But if you do feel like there needs to be some changes, and we would love to move this forward because it's something we've been working on for a long time. We've done a lot of public engagement. If you want to add a condition to have us look into something specific, if it's driveway widths, if there's a few things you feel like maybe we've missed the boat on that, we would be happy to investigate that. And then once we get it transmitted to the council, we can take those conditions with there and discuss what changes we made or why we didn't make changes. So.
How does the commission feel about?
I'm willing to make the motion if people have specific additions that they want to make to that.
I'd put the conditions about, I think just exploring or talking about from an expert, limiting lot sizes. I would be interested in having the city council weigh that and consider that more. I think I would like Brenda's suggestion about, as you're putting townhouses or the different forms that they have, all of them access a public street or I think those two, are really helpful ways that you encourage. You're not going to get just 200 square feet, an alleyway, 200 square feet. We just encourage because people are going to build around both sides, that it gets broken up. And just really making sure in the motion that it's clear that we're concerned about breaking up this block.
I also think it would be nice to make that mid-block walkway flexible so that it's not splitting it into 4 quadrants, but require that it is in place, that you have an equivalent of a north, south, east, west, but that it has some flexibility of where it may be placed, because it is a square T in the master plan.
And we generally have been very flexible with those standards because that's why it's a dashed line on a little map and not like a parcel map, because we understand reality isn't this and this, right? I mean, maybe on this block it is because we own it, but we've been giving flexibility on. We don't let people get away with not doing them, but if that means it's 35% through the block rather than 50% exactly, we've approved those developments.
But is that only required when you have an entire block? Like, what if you have the middle parcel of a block that's already subdivided? You have to put that in?
Yes. You may only have to do 50% of that, and the person next to you might have to develop their portion. But
if you happen to own the parcel that falls geographically in the middle of the block, then you're required to put at least half of a mid-block crossing in if you develop.
Okay. I'll make the motion. Based on the information in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move the Planning Commission recommend the City Council approve the proposed amendments, PLN PCM 2019-00277 Fleet Block zoning amendments with the following additional considerations for the council. Okay, Matt.
I'm listening.
Oh, I need you to help me, though.
I need to say it? Well, I'll say I would like the council to consider limiting lot size.
Limiting lot sizes, and what was the other one?
Developments need to have street frontage.
And
Or
developments
right-of-way.
have
Right-of-way.
Like right-of-way
frontage on
frontage.
rights of way or street
Brenda
frontage.
understands and articulates this
Public
much better
way,
than me.
right?
Either it
Or
can
a
be a
public way.
pedestrian public way, but it has to be a public way.
Okay. And that mid-block walkways be required, but they can be flexible in nature,
In terms of location.
in terms of location.
And I think also, Amy and I were just talking about maybe having a maximum parking lot size. So you don't end up with a sea of parking in the back of surface parking.
Parking is restricted in this zone anyway, isn't it?
Limited as far as the number of stalls you can have, but not necessarily
In
the
total
size.
Configuration.
I think we're
Behind
in the
the
middle of
building.
a motion.
And I think it's a.
I think we're in the middle of a motion.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a motion.
So it's a request for the council to review limiting the parking lot size.
And potentially limiting the size of surface parking lots. There you go.
Do we need to
We
restate the
summarize,
motion
yeah, I
for-
think we do.
For clarity?
I mean, there's certainly a noble group effort of emotion. It was an unusual format. Marlene, do you feel like you have that down? Okay. If we could restate it, that would be
Okay.
helpful.
Maureen, do you want me to restate?
Okay, with the following conditions: to limit the size of the lots, to
Require frontage on
require
public streets
frontage
or rights of
on
way.
rights of way or streets, and to have the mid-block, require the mid-block walkways, but allow them to be flexible in location, and to maximize the size of surface parking lots.
Minimize.
Limit the size of surface parking lots.
Okay, so you said conditions. I think you meant considerations.
Considerations,
Thank you.
yes.
Okay, we have a motion of sorts.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion from Maureen, a second from Carolyn. Any other discussion? Okay. Matt,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Brenda,
Yes.
Amy.
Thank you, Daniel, for your good work, as always. You have to muddle through all of our comments. I vote yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
Andreas.
I also want to thank you, Daniel, for all your hard work on this. I know you've been here a long time working on this, so thank you. Yes.
And Darren.
I'm going to trust everyone that's been looking at this longer than I have and vote yes.
Great. All right. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That is the end of our agenda, so we are now adjourned.
Good job. It was really well put together. I didn't know that my comment didn't intend to say it wasn't. I think good consideration. So I think it's just you did good. Yeah.